Welcome to Clear 2 View News, your trusted source for uncovering the truth behind today's most pressing issues. In this video, we're diving deep into the controversial prosecution of former President Donald Trump by Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. You'll see how political motivations are influencing the judicial process, turning the law into a weapon. Stay tuned as we expose the tactics and players behind this case, revealing the alarming trend of judicial weaponization. Don't forget to subscribe to Clear 2 View News for more insightful analysis and breaking news updates.
Will now Chair now recognize himself for an opening statement. Alvin Bragg's prosecution of President Trump is lawfare at its worst. The New York County District Attorney's Office began investigating President Trump in 2018. The Southern District of New York months later concluded its investigation into the payments by Michael Cohen and determined no charges should be brought against President Trump. While this was going on, Alvin Bragg was running for the job. While on the campaign trail, Mr. Bragg boasted about the number of times he had already sued President Trump. In January 2021, Mr. Bragg stated, "I'm the candidate in the race who has the experience with Donald Trump," close quote. He said that it'd be hard to argue with the fact that any case against President Trump would be the most important, most high-profile case. Mr. Bragg won and took office in January 2022. A few weeks after taking office, he told one of his prosecutors, Mark Pomerantz, quote, he could not see a world in which he would indict President Trump and call Michael Cohen as a prosecution witness. That's right, after campaigning on going after the former president, Bragg gets into office and realizes the case against President Trump is ridiculous. That is why the Southern District of New York didn't bring it. It's why his predecessor, Cy Vance, didn't bring it. Why did Bragg change his mind? Mark Pomerantz, Special Assistant District Attorney, resigned in protest, and he and his fellow Assistant District Attorney, Kerry Dunn, leaked their resignation letter to the New York Times. After that, the left began the pressure campaign on Alvin Bragg, and suddenly the zombie case was resurrected. One of the first things Alvin Bragg did was hire Matthew Colangelo, a top official in the Biden Justice Department who had a history of taking on President Trump and his family's businesses. It's also interesting to note who Mr. Colangelo listed as his references when he applied for the job at the Justice Department. He listed Tom Perez, former DNC chair, and Jeff Zients, who is now President Biden's chief of staff. That's right. The head of the DNC and the Biden White House chief of staff, those were his references. That's the guy who went to work to be the lead prosecutor on the case against President Trump. Alvin Bragg, Matthew Colangelo picked their target, searched for a crime, and then they prosecuted President Trump. The partisan DA that campaigned on going after President Trump, whose newly hired lead prosecutor for the case also had a history of taking on President Trump, also had their case in front of a partisan judge. A judge who donated to President Biden, who imposed a gag order on President Trump, who told the jury they didn't need to reach a unanimous decision, and prevented one of our witnesses today, Mr. Smith, an expert on campaign finance, from giving real testimony to the court. Today, Mr. Smith will be given an opportunity to tell Congress and tell the country what he wasn't permitted to tell the court, what he wasn't permitted to tell the jury. Remember, Bragg and Colangelo bootstrapped charges that are normally misdemeanors to some underlying crime to make the charges a felony. But what was the underlying crime? Prosecutors didn't reveal that until after the trial began. Mr. Colangelo, in his opening statement, accused President Trump of violating the Federal Elections Campaign Act. But the problem is, in the plain reading of that act, doesn't support the indictment or the verdict. As Commissioner Smith stated, allowing this prosecution to go forward and the ultimate jury decision threaten the enforcement procedures established by Congress under the act and stretch the meaning of the statute in such a way as to threaten due process of law. Although Judge Merchan wouldn't permit the leading expert on campaign finance to provide this testimony, he did let someone else speak in the court on this issue and others, Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen, a convicted perjurer, someone even his former lawyer said you couldn't trust. Michael Cohen, who lied to Congress, lied to the FBI, and lied to the court. It's not often you have a witness that can lie to all three branches of government and then become the star witness in the prosecution of a former president. But that's exactly what took place in New York. It is clear Manhattan District Judge Juan Merchan's decisions, guided by political bias, unfairly prejudiced the outcome of the trial and violated President Trump's due process rights. Bragg's prosecution of President Trump, with the help of Judge Merchan, opened the door for politically motivated prosecutions, and it will not be easy to undo the damage that's already been done. As we have seen, other ambitious prosecutors have followed Bragg's lead and pursued politically motivated indictments against the former president. Rather than debate political opponents on substance, the Democrats' strategy to win the 2024 election is through the use of partisan, lawfare tactics. These politically motivated local prosecutions raise substantial federal interest and potential collusion between federal and state authorities. And that is precisely why we are here today. Alvin Bragg's prosecution of President Trump was personal, it was based on politics, and
Clearly, Alvin Bragg's campaign promise to get Trump was just the kind of objective, unbiased approach we need in law enforcement. And by objective, I mean the kind of objectivity that makes you change your mind only after being pressured by the left and hiring Biden's top hatchet man, Matthew Colangelo. Pure integrity in action, folks. Alvin Bragg only wants to politically hang Donald J. Trump.
Professor Smith, in your in your written testimony, you said that the lead prosecutor, Matthew Colangelo, in his opening statement in the court, accused President Trump of violating the Federal Election Campaign Act. But the FEC didn't bring charges, I think you've said a couple times. Is that true?
That's correct.
And the Department of Justice didn't bring charges.
That's correct.
And if President Trump's campaign had paid for it, it wouldn't have been reported until after the election. Is that right?
That's correct.
And did President Trump's campaign have the money to pay for it?
Yes, they had plenty of money.
And like $7-8 million still on hand on election day, I think, right?
Yes.
And certainly President Trump had the money to pay for it. He's not.
Yes, he'd already spent over $60 million on it.
Yeah, he had. So they'd already done that. Was it a political contribution?
No, I do not believe so for reasons stated. I can elaborate on those now, but
Not only do you not believe so, their star witness didn't believe so. Michael Cohen said he was working clear back in 2011 to deal with this Miss Daniels making the allegations and wouldn't make this public, and he was doing it for other reasons. Isn't that correct?
Yes, they had been concerned about Daniels for a long time and keeping her quiet.
So the obligation wasn't caused by President Trump's candidacy for president of the United States. Is that right?
No, it was not.
Okay, Mr. Fahey, in your written testimony, you said one of the most alarming aspects of the case is that the fraud, quote, fraud, did not involve anyone losing money or even being harmed in any way. To the extent that the ledger entries were inaccurate, they were entered into the books of a private company that understood what they were for. It is unheard of for a fraud case to be brought where no losses were suffered. So there weren't any losses in this case at all, were there?
Yeah, that's what makes this so remarkable. And just, I can't even imagine someone bringing a fraud case to the United States Attorney's Office where nobody lost money, there were no victims, and no one was worse off at the end of it. It just makes it laughable, even before you get to steps 2 through probably 20 that make this case really absurd to have been brought to begin with.
It wasn't a contribution. If it was a contribution, it wouldn't have been reported until after the election, and no one suffered any losses, and yet they bring this charge against President Trump. I find that just amazing. If that's not political motivation, I don't know, because what other motivation could there be?
It's really almost inarguable at this point that the motivation for this case was political. It's really, I've never heard a serious argument that it should have been prosecuted otherwise. I know Mr. Wu might have one, but I just haven't heard that, because it seems political from the inception all the way to the end.
Yeah. Wasn't a contribution, wouldn't have been reported even if it was, if they paid that out of the campaign. No one suffered loss, and yet there was some kind of conspiracy to impact an election. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it is they didn't tell the defendant what the crime was he was being charged with. Isn't that right, Judge?
That's correct. Right from the indictment, Donald Trump was charged with falsifying business records. To elevate that crime to a felony, he had to be concealing or committing other crimes.
When did the defendant in this trial, in this case, learn what he was being charged with?
At the end of the trial.
At the end of the trial. That's not supposed to happen in America, is it, Judge?
No, that is illegal.
So not only did he not know what he's being charged with, at the end of the trial, when he learned what it was, the judge also told the jury, oh, you don't have to be unanimous in finding what we just discovered the charge actually was.
That's an extraordinarily egregious error to tell a jury they don't have to be unanimous. And I might add, by the way, those charges, the 3 additional ones, were never specified. They're described generally. So we don't know what exactly the jury thought was the illegality that was committed by Donald Trump. We have a very inspecific verdict.
Campaign finance expert says it wasn't a contribution, And even if it was a contribution, if they treated it as a contribution, paid it out of the campaign, it wouldn't have been reported until after the election, so there's no conspiracy to influence the election. No one suffered any harm or fraud in the initial case, former prosecutor tells us, and the judge tells us that the defendant didn't know what he was charged with until the end of the trial, and the judge gave instructions to the jury, never mind the fact the judge should have recused himself, which you point out in your written testimony, Judge. The judge didn't tell the jury, or told the jury you don't have to be unanimous. But the real thing here is the opportunity cost. And you raised this in your testimony, Mr. Fahey. The opportunity cost. When Alvin Bragg did the day one memo, says we are not going to charge all these felonies, we're going to bring them down to misdemeanors and let the bad guys roam the streets of New York. How that squares with what happened here, that to me is the real issue. That's the issue that most Americans see, like, we're going to do this to the former president of the United States, meanwhile, take felony charges against really bad guys on the street and bring them down to misdemeanors. That's the opportunity cost here, I believe, in Manhattan. You get the last word, Mr. Fahey.
Yeah, exactly. When you're letting carjackers out on bail or illegal immigrants that assault police officers aren't getting prosecuted, but this is the way you're using your time, in addition to the fact you run on a soft on crime policy and then you take the most creative, aggressive approach to this crime, it's hard to argue it's anything other than a political motivation.
Thank you for watching. As we've shown, the case against Donald Trump is a glaring example of judicial weaponization driven by political bias. This makes my head blow up with anger. If you're as outraged as we are, join us at Clear 2 View News for more in-depth investigations and honest reporting. Subscribe to our channel and stay informed on the issues that matter. Together we can uncover the truth and make our voices heard.